Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to the midweek show. It's always nice to have you, always nice to see you. And if this is your first time here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the like button if you hear what you see, like what you hear and see. And also, just to give you some background, normally at the weekend in our main show, we talk about everything that's happening in Scottish politics. But we understand that our main aim is independence and that one day we'll go out in the big bad world. So we need to know what's going on out there. We have to understand, because we're going to have to interact with all those things. And there's nothing bigger in the world at the moment, and a lot of people don't want to discuss it for obvious reasons, but than what's going on in both the Middle East, or should I say West Asia, and in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. But today I'm going to concentrate mainly on what's happening in Gaza, the horrific things that are unfolding there. And to help me to do that, I'm joined by my colleague Yvonne Ridley.
Hi, Roddy.
Hi, Yvonne. Thank you for being here at such short notice. I should just say, folks, that I had a call off and Yvonne stepped into the breach for me, and I appreciate it very much. And also, I've got ex-British UK Ambassador Craig Murray.
Hello there, Roddy.
Hi, Craig. Nice to see you again, my friend. How are you?
I'm very well in the circumstances.
Yeah, well, the circumstances, a good place as any to start. Craig, you were over in Reykjavik in Iceland recently on a vigil outside. I'm not quite sure, was a vigil about Julian Assange? And
yeah, no, I was there for a campaign meeting of the campaign to free Julian Assange. You know, Iceland's a good place, good venue for people to quote. Sorry about that. I don't know how I can stop that happening while we're recording, Roddy. So.
Can't hear anything, it's all right.
Oh, okay. You couldn't hear anything?
No. Well, I couldn't. I don't know about Ted.
Oh, okay, because the phone rang very noisily. Let me start.
Iceland.
Yep. Iceland's a very good place for people from the United States and from Europe to get together and kind of meet in the middle, and also has a very liberal governmental climate. Iceland actually recognises Palestine instead. So I was there for a meeting, an organisational meeting of the campaign to free Julian Assange. And while I was there, there was a vigil protest outside the Icelandic Parliament, which I joined, which was a perfectly peaceful protest of about 1,000 people, families. It was a nice occasion, except it was cold and wet, but it was a good occasion.
And then when you returned home, you got a beautiful British welcome, did you not?
Yeah, I arrived back into Glasgow airport, and as I came back from passport control, I was picked up by 2 policemen and a policewoman and taken into a room and told I was detained. And this is really interesting because this is Section 7 of the Terrorism Act, which is notorious. And what they told me was that I was detained and not arrested. Therefore, I could not leave, and it was a criminal offence to leave. But that if I were, but that I was not entitled to a lawyer. I was not entitled to a lawyer. I was also told that it was that I did not have the right to remain silent. Specifically, if I failed to answer any questions, that was itself a criminal offence, and I had to give full and true answers. And if they were not full and true, that was also a criminal offence. And that they would take my my electronic devices, and I had to give them the passcodes for my electronic devices, and not to give them the passcodes was a criminal offence. So this is remarkably Stalinist and astonishing. And so they then interviewed me for 1 hour. They took my devices. I gave them the passwords because they told me it's a criminal offence not to give them the passwords. And they interviewed me for exactly 1 hour. And they were clock watching. I mean, at one stage, it said 18 minutes left. It didn't tell me why they were interviewing me for 1 hour precisely. But I since discovered from my lawyers that after 1 hour, they have to give you the right to a lawyer, which I wasn't aware. And of course, had I been aware that after 1 hour I had to have the right to a lawyer, then I would have conducted myself very differently.
Yeah, sat silent for an hour.
Yeah, or, chatted about the weather and, I mean, it's extraordinary the pressure they put upon you. And this idea that you can be, this idea of detained and not arrested. You can't leave, but you're not under arrest. I mean, and that's purely because once you're arrested, you have the right to a lawyer. And it doesn't exist anywhere else in law in the UK. It's an appalling bit of draconian legislation built in a panic after 9/11, I believe.
Yvonne, aren't you glad you don't live somewhere like North Korea? You live in somewhere in the UK where it's all wonderful and rainbows and unicorns, etc. Quite disgusting what happened to Craig.
Well, I mean, that story, it's like something from a dystopian novel. Craig is a former ambassador, would probably be more used to traveling through the diplomatic channels without hinder, and to be treated like this in Glasgow airport. It's just awful. This paranoia that is pervasive all over London and Birmingham and Manchester. The fact that it's now seeping up here is just awful. This is one of the reasons that I came up to Scotland, primarily because the government was so progressive under Alex Salmond, and there was talk of the referendum. I thought this will be a great place to live, to escape from all of that. But, if you wear something like this, you're putting a target on your back. It's absolutely extraordinary times that we're living in. And I've lived and worked in states, in police states before. And it's feeling more and more like a police state. It's awful. This is not, this is not the country that we want to live in. And Craig sounds as though he was being held in some sort of room 101. Were they uniformed, Craig? Craig.
Is Craig frozen there? Looks as if he's frozen in time.
That's got to be a first.
But we'll hopefully he'll come back. But they'll come back in soon. But you're back in the room now, Craig.
Yeah, no idea what happened there.
Yeah, good. I don't know if you heard, Craig, about there was also a young lad down in, I think it was the London pro-Palestine demonstration. They implemented the breach of the peace down there for wearing a Palestinian flag around his shoulders. It really is getting quite worrying. We're not allowed our freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and freedom of belief. Yeah,
it's being suggested to me that I was detained because of a tweet I put out in which I was saying that in the coming days, during this genocide, the Palestinian people have the right of self-defense, which I believe. The idea. I mean, people who don't believe that, what do they think? Do they think Palestinian people would line up in the street in the shop? Palestinians have the right of self-defense, and it can't be a crime to like to see a ceasefire. But as long as they're being attacked, they have the right of self-defense. Yeah. So it suggested that's the reason why I was detained. Though I should say, it was never mentioned to me by the police. They didn't mention any specific tweet or social media post. They asked me about my social media. They asked me if I wrote all the posts myself, what help I had. And they spent a lot of time asking me about my relationship to the campaign to free Julian Assange. And in particular, they asked me whether I was paid by the campaign to free Julian Assange. They asked me whether I was paid by WikiLeaks, whether I was paid by Sunshine Press Limited, which is a company associated with WikiLeaks in Iceland. And they asked me whether I was paid by the Assange family. Now, the answer to all of those questions is no. I'm not paid by any of those people. As I told them, my income comes from my small civil service pension and subscribers to my blog. But that's where my income comes from. But, you know, this kind of extraordinary probing into my personal financial affairs, which have nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism, no remote connection to terrorism there. And if I were paid by the campaign to free Julian Assange, why would that be a criminal offence? What interest is that to the police? You know, why are they asking me those questions in a circumstance where they tell me I have to answer, and not to answer is a criminal offence, and not to give a truthful answer is a criminal offence? As it happens, it was easy. The answer is no, I'm not paid. But how is that justified under the Terrorism Act? You know, they were seeking to get information on the Assange defence campaign using the Terrorism Act as a cover. They then were asking me why I was on the protest in Iceland, which was, you know, a particularly stupid question. They were asking, sorry, but the police took away my laptop, so I'm speaking to you on my phone, and my phone keeps ringing, which makes life difficult.
Price of popularity, Craig. The price of popularity.
And I was able to tell them that the reason I was on the protest in Iceland was that a friend of mine was speaking at it, who happens to be the former Interior Minister of Iceland, and he asked me to come along. I also was able to tell them I had no idea what anybody said, because it was all in Icelandic, and I don't speak Icelandic, but it appeared a perfectly peaceful and respectable gathering. One of the questions they asked me, which was interesting, they asked me, am I intending to attend any pro-Palestinian protests in the UK? They asked me that specifically. Are you intending to attend any pro-Palestinian protests in the UK? And, you know, again, what business is that of theirs? It's not in the least illegal to attend a pro-Palestinian protest yet. I know
not yet.
I know Suella Braverman's trying to make it illegal. And then they asked me an interesting question, which is how I judged whether to appear at a protest in terms of who else was on the platform. And that was a strange question to ask. I told them very often these large protests, you have no idea who else is on the platform. For one thing, sometimes they go on for ages and you're not there the whole time. You've no idea who else is speaking, and you can't possibly know who's in a crowd of 100,000 people. But what I do is I judge by who the organizer is. If the organizer is somebody I trust, like the Palestine Solidarity Committee, then I will happily go along and talk. I judge by the organizers in effect. But I was telling this to my lawyers, and the lawyer said they'd never heard of that question being asked before, and they assume that they've somehow got hold of a copy of me in proximity to a terrorist somewhere. Somebody, you know, who almost certainly I probably didn't know and never met, but was close to at a protest or something along those lines. But they must have something that they're going for.
Was it possibly Tony Blair? Or George Bush you were standing beside?
Well, exactly. I mean, at the moment, anybody from the Israeli government or the Israeli Defense Force. That was the most pointed question they asked. Other than that, it was all very, very general. And I mean, my impression was, and I should say that I had no complaint about the individual policemen. They were doing their job, a rather stupid and unpleasant job, but they were doing their job in a perfectly professional manner and being as friendly as they were allowed to be to me in the circumstances. I mean, my impression was they thought this was stupid too, but they. But so I make no complaint about the individual police officers. But it seemed to me that the entire point was to justify the seizure of my laptop and my phone so they can gain access to everything about my private life and perhaps go on a huge fishing expedition in the hope that they find something. And of course, anybody is going to be worried that they're going to plant something. You know, do I trust the police? No, not as far as I can throw them. Certainly not. I don't think those policemen I met that day would do that. But do I think there are people in the police, particularly down in their special operations unit in London, where no doubt my laptop now is, who will do that? Yeah, I'm quite bloody certain there are people there who would be prepared to do that.
I suppose what you'd be saying to these policemen, of course, they would just say, we were only following orders. We've heard that one before. And as to why they were asking you about financial matters, you know, it could be the old Al Capone clause on you, Craig, that, you know, you hadn't declared tax, they could throw you in jail. Maybe that's what they were hoping for.
I mean, they've already, the state has already been arguing that I should have paid tax on the donations to my legal fund to fight my legal case for contempt of court over the Alex Salmond trial. My argument is, which my lawyers tell me is perfectly true, that I am a sole trader. I trade as myself. I have income, I have expenses, and you pay tax when you net the two off. And that the legal fees for things I had published, and it's my blog that the income comes from, that the legal things for things I had published are a writable off expense. That you take the income, you take the expense, you net them off, and then you pay income on your you pay tax on your remaining income. But I mean, they've already tried that on as a sort of persecution, and they've done the same to Stuart Campbell. Remember, of course, in I think almost identical circumstances. They essentially, if you're a dissident nowadays, there's no route the state's not going to go down to try to get you.
It's quite frightening. And the reasons, one of those reasons is because of what we're about to start really discussing here in depth. And Yvonne, as you know, I'm one of those anti-war types, protester. The establishment won't like me. But I do accept there is a right for Israel to defend itself. I say the same for Ukraine. I say the same for any nation. You have a right to defend yourself. But surely by the same token, the Palestinians have a right to defend themselves.
Under international law, I can't remember which UN resolution it is, but the Palestinians have a right to resist the very brutal occupation that they're in at the moment. So what people forget is that, you know, Palestinians do have a right, and they've had this right for 75 years. And what does the world want them to do? As Craig said, just stand up and wait to be shot. You know, of course they've got a right to resist. And at the moment, there are 260,000 troops circled around the border between Israel and Gaza. And they've been there now for 3-4 days. What I'm hearing, and I haven't got corroboration for this, so everybody check this out, but what I'm hearing is that there have been a lot of soldiers going AWOL. They don't want to go into Gaza. And probably with good reason as well. From my contacts on the ground in Gaza, I've been told that Hamas has been preparing for 2 years for this attack on their oppressors. And if they have spent 2 years preparing, then, you know, they launched this military strike. I'm quite sure that they will have planned for the hostage taking, exactly where to hold the hostages, how many they'll hold, and you know, what they'll do with them. And I'm sure that they've also thought, yes, let's remember the backlash, because there will be a backlash. So I think that this has been dwelling on the minds of the army. And I think that they're probably hoping and praying that the international community will stop them from going in. It's one thing bombing your enemy from 20,000 feet in the air. You can't see them. They can't fire back, because don't forget, the Palestinians don't have a military. So, and the war in Iraq, in the shock and awe was brought to Iraq with 60,000 international troops. There are 260,000 Israeli soldiers on the Gaza border at the moment, with all of their tanks. And King Jordan was right when he said we're staring into an abyss, because if Hezbollah suddenly decides to join in, and there have been noises from Lebanon saying, if you invade Gaza, we will react strongly. Well, Hezbollah is a totally different entity to Hamas. They are armed. They are dangerous. They are a formidable enemy. The last time I was in Lebanon, I went south of the Litani River and was shown around the Hezbollah Museum, and they have 35 Israeli tanks. And when the Israeli army was running for its life from Hezbollah, they abandoned their tanks. It was easier just to jump out of the tanks and run like hell for the Israeli border. So they've got these 35 Israeli tanks that are worth about $30 million each. And so the longer that the Israeli military sits there, I think that their preference of fighting is in the air, from using B-52 bombers and dropping weapons on a civilian population. And we know that there is no such thing as a surgical strike.
Yeah. But just before I come on the air, Craig, I just checked, and it's gonna. This is before the hospital was blown up, and we'll talk about that in a second. I have it up to date that 2,837 Palestinians have died. 942 of them are children. And there's over 12,000 injured. And that's just in Gaza. Over in the West Bank, which is as such peaceful, there was no resistance action there. 35 have died in the West Bank since this began, including 17 of them children, mainly killed by settler militias. The killing just goes on, and there doesn't. You know, where are all the peacemakers, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, the horrible thing is that, you know, there have been calls in the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council, before it has a formal meeting, there are lots of informal meetings and negotiations where resolutions are circulated on green paper. And as they get, the colour of paper changes as they get more fixed towards a formal Security Council meeting. But the UK, the US, and France have made absolutely plain at the UN that they veto all calls for a ceasefire. And that's just simply appalling. You know, they are actively supporting genocide, as we know in the case of the UK and US, have actually, as if Israel needed military assistance to wipe out the Palestinians, but when Israel has this massive imbalance of weapons and arms. But we're even sending military assistance to assist the genocide, and we're doing everything possible diplomatically to prevent a ceasefire, to help this genocide go forward. And I should add, and I hope people know me well enough to understand that what I say is in no way influenced by the fact that the police tried to detain and intimidate me. But obviously, I don't support the taking of hostages into Hamas by Hamas, because that's also illegal. International law should be observed by all sides, but the precursor to that has to be a ceasefire. Because at the moment, no, Israel has formally declared war. We are under the laws of war. And both sides are entitled to act under the laws of war and act in self-defense. It's a horribly asymmetric war, where all of the weaponry is basically on one side. But it is nonetheless part of war. But plainly, the British government wants to see the genocide in Gaza unfold. And they're looking to a solution to the Palestinian problem as they see it, which involves Israel acquiring more land, making Gaza an even smaller and more densely populated enclave, and killing tens of thousands. My guess, I don't think they're going to be satisfied until they've killed tens of thousands of Palestinians. And of those, half will be children. Half the dead will be children. We're looking at them actively seeking. We live in this country with a government which is actively seeking the death of thousands of children and is actively seeking diplomatically to thwart any attempts to stop the deaths of thousands of children. It's an astonishing thing to say. Now, I wish I did not have to say it, but it's true.
Yeah, it's quite true. I mean, what to say, so there's no misunderstanding. Whether it be a Palestinian death, an Israeli death, a Ukrainian death, a Russian death, in any conflict, Yvonne, I just believe conflicts are wrong. And, I think even the great warmonger himself, Churchill, said that jaw is better than war. And we need peacemakers. But the fact is that, as Craig has said, the Western powers don't want peace in Ukraine. They don't want peace in Palestine either. And the Palestinians are in an open-air prison. I mean, it is literally like shooting ducks in a barrel, or fish in a barrel, rather.
Well, of course, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, the Israeli occupation forces spokesman, would tell you that this is all necessary because of Hamas. Well, if that's the case, what the hell are they killing children for in the West Bank? Over 60 children have died this last week in the occupied West Bank, where Hamas aren't in control. Hamas fighters aren't on the ground. So if Hamas isn't there, why are they killing all these children in the West Bank? And furthermore, why were they killing Palestinians before the creation of Hamas? Hamas came about, I think, in the 70s. And it had its political wing and its military wing. And the Israelis just seem to have forced this narrative that they are the victims. They've got the fourth most powerful army in the world, and they're using that army on women and children. And it's a cowardly army. It's sitting on the edge of Gaza. I don't think it wants to go in. It's more used to having its soldiers deployed at checkpoints where they can rip the hijab of Palestinian women, where they can abuse Palestinian kids. You know that they've got this thing called administrative detention, and hundreds of Palestinian children are being held in prisons without charge, without trial, along with thousands of other Palestinian men and women. And yet they say that they are the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, if that's the case, how can you hold thousands of people hostage in prisons without charge or without trial? And if they're not hostages, then they're political prisoners.
Yeah, but they're also like Craig. They're also refused access to legal representation as well.
Israel just uses its own language for everything that it does, and it has this PR setup that, for instance, you know, when they murdered Shireen Abu Akleh, the American Arab journalist from Al Jazeera, Palestinian woman, first of all, they denied it. Then they said, oh, yes, she was killed, but she was killed by terrorists. And then when irrefutable proof is put up, and then they're told, no, it's not the work of terrorists. We can prove that she was killed by an Israeli sniper. They then say, well, we will carry out our own investigation. We're not having outsiders investigate our soldiers, so we will report back. And then they report back and say, yes, in the fog of war, it appears that we may be culpable. And we're getting this narrative over the bombing of this hospital.
I'm coming on to that. If I could, though, Craig, as I said, as part of your introduction, you're an ex-ambassador. And, you know, there's language that we appreciate, there's language that ambassadors have to use. But just your comments on, if I get her name right, Tzipi Potobli, who's the Israeli ambassador to the United Kingdom. When she was on the BBC, one of the things she was saying is, there is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. There is no humanitarian crisis. What do you make of that? As an ex-ambassador?
It astonishes. I mean, the fact you are an ambassador shouldn't remove any shred of human decency that you have left, whereas she plainly has no human decency whatsoever. And to say things which are just so plainly lies is astonishing to me. I should say, Roddy, I'm going to have to sign off, unfortunately, because I'll just say a couple of things before I go, but I'm getting all kinds of phone calls coming in from my legal team, so I'd better get back to them. But in terms of saying ludicrous things which are plainly untrue, it cannot have been a missile from Gaza that destroyed the hospital. The Palestinians just don't have commercial military warheads that can inflict that kind of damage. In fact, I was trying to look up today, and the most people who have ever been killed by a Palestinian missile. Sorry, I'd like to cancel a call. And the most, in a single incident, I can't actually find an incident where more than 2 people were killed by a Palestinian missile because they don't have proper warheads. And 2 people is too many. And I don't want anybody to have proper warheads. But I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is the idea that the Palestinians suddenly got a missile 100 times more powerful than anything they've ever had before, which is what fell on that hospital, is nuts. And nobody with any sense whatsoever would give 10 seconds to the argument that it was a Palestinian rocket that hit the hospital. It plainly was not. They have nothing nearly that powerful. And it's just shameful to me that journalists are pretending this is open to doubt and pretending that, one side says this, the other side says that. And I should say, I just cannot watch the media anymore. I can't. I can't watch the BBC. I can't read The Guardian. I can't even... I get so upset by it, by the mendacity and lies which so-called journalists are spewing out. I just can't do it. Now, I'm sorry, I really, really must go because my lawyers are calling.
You take care. Thanks for your time, Craig. I know you're very busy today. Thanks for what time you've given us.
Right, bye.
On that, Yvonne, Techie, can you take Craig out? For on that, what Craig was talking about, the hospital. The first thing the Israelis said, and all the Western media joined in, was, well, it was a rocket from the Hamas that went wrong, and as not just Craig but many others have pointed out, impossible. They don't have that kind of thing. Then they went, well, actually, it was in the basement. There was a huge Hamas terrorist base, and that's why. And then they quickly took that off of social media, and then they were saying, well, we did warn them to get out. And then they took that down as well. They've been dancing about all the different reasons. And I see today, the Kuwait hospital in Gaza, they have been told to get out. Now, you don't have to be a genius to join those dots.
No, absolutely not. And it's a cautionary tale for people who become volatile on Twitter, as some of the Israelis have. Benjamin Netanyahu's staff, I believe, sent out a tweet about the hospital bombing and then immediately rescinded it. But once it had gone out, it was captured. And I can't read Hebrew, but my understanding is that it's an admission that Israel was involved. The whole of the Arab world knows that. Joe Biden, before he got on his flight from America to Israel, was told about the hospital bombing. And he was also told that the King of Jordan, who had organized a peace lobby to meet Biden, had cancelled the event. And that involved Saudi, the UAE, many of the Gulf states. And the King of Jordan, who was going to host the event, cancelled it. The right thing for Biden to have done would have been to cancel his flight and not go out. But he has gone out. Yeah. Which is extraordinary. You know, this is the second time a US president has been in a war zone where there's no sign of a treaty being signed. And the message is quite clear to the rest of the world. America will give unconditional support to Israel and back it to the hilt, regardless of what it does. And this was the message that Sir Keir Starmer gave out just a few days ago.
Yeah.
And to have a former DPP endorse war crimes was absolutely shocking. And it was so untenable that he's already lost one Birmingham MP. She has, I forget her name, but she has resigned and become an independent. It's cost him 2 senior councillors in Oxford City Council, and they've both stood down and declared themselves independent. And there's another one in Manchester. This is just the start. He's also frittering away the landslide victory that he was hoping for in the general election in 2024. And I see that Anas Sarwar has been remarkably mute about what's happening in Gaza.
And him a good Muslim too.
Well, this will have an impact on the political landscape in Scotland. You know, we have our First Minister, Humza Yousaf, who has drawn a genuine warm wave of sympathy over the plight of his mother-in-law, who, as far as I can gather, is still trapped in Gaza today. And when it comes that close to home, and his wife Nadia spoke very eloquently and articulately about this situation and the pain and the suffering that she and others were going through because her mother is trapped in Gaza. This is a woman from Scotland. And you showed on the previous Prism, you showed her video that she made. And when she made that video, she genuinely thought this is going to be her last message to the outside world.
Yeah, horrific. It's no coincidence, Yvonne, that all the same cheerleaders who are cheering on the American proxy war in Ukraine are the same ones who are cheering on the Israelis in this. I mean, Craig described it as a genocidal action. But the EU is another one, and if it could, Ursula von der Leyen, who is a horrific woman, a war woman, an absolute hawk. She couldn't get to Israel quick enough. They all did the same. They went to Kiev to get their photo opportunities. She was on a plane tout suite to swear undying loyalty and support from the EU for Israel. Now, could I just say there's some leading lights, some little candles of hope in the European Parliament. They're both Irish. One's Mick Wallace and the other one's Claire Daly. Techie, can you stick up Claire Daly's response to Ursula von Crazy going to Tel Aviv?
I've been involved in politics for 40 years, but I have never seen anything like what is being unleashed in Gaza, in full public view, while the world watches it unfold. 10 days of relentless airstrikes, 1 in 1,000 people murdered by the Israeli government in a week, open declarations of siege, 24 hours of fuel, electricity and water left, collective punishment on innocent people, all illegal, all war crimes. And when the EU should have been arguing for a ceasefire, for the upholding of international law, for the protection of civilians, Ursula von der Leyen touches down in Tel Aviv to photo op the preparation of a genocide and says Europe stands with Israel now and in the days to come. How dare she? She has no authority in foreign affairs matter. She does not speak for me, she does not speak for Ireland, and she does not speak for the citizens of Europe. We stand for peace, we stand for justice for the people of Palestine and for the upholding of international law. It's long past the time that this woman exited the stage. It's time for her to go and for the International Criminal Court
So
to
the debate is closed.
No, I know of the two, Ursula von der Leyen or Claire Daly, who would get my vote, and it wouldn't be the German.
No, not at all. I wonder what these politicians think when they see 200,000 rallying in London. Was it 15,000 or more in Glasgow? Hundreds of thousands in Karachi. And of course, in Karachi, Pakistan, where Imran Khan, their former leader, is in prison on the most spurious charges. But of course, Imran Khan's fate was probably sealed when he publicly declared his support for Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are troubled times, and you know, just wearing any sort of Palestinian paraphernalia, I wouldn't go out wearing this scarf in case I was attacked, because you just don't know who's out there and what they see. But what I do know from my Jewish friends is that there is a lot of pain in the Jewish community. And much of it is real. Some of the fear may be imagined, but they feel it's real. And when you look at the history of the Jewish people, and I'm talking long before the Holocaust, the persecution over the centuries, each new generation carries this burden with them. And then the Holocaust on top of that. And there are lots of genuine Jewish people who do not believe in the formation of the Israeli state. They don't believe in its existence. They would prefer to live in the countries wherever they're living. And you will see Jewish people on the pro-Palestinian demonstrations. But there is a lot of pain and fear from that community. And, you know,
Yvonne, but isn't it that a lot of people out here maybe don't know, there's a difference between being Jewish and Zionism. And it's the Zionists that are the problem, not the Jewish people. The Jewish people are like any Christian, Muslim, they're peace-loving people. It's the Zionists who have this crazy plan of owning the whole Middle East.
Well, there are some very strong Zionist groups in Scotland, but the one thing that makes me very proud of living in Scotland is that it is the only European country which has never, ever carried out state persecution of the Jewish people. And you know, the Jewish community in Scotland, I would say to them, please stay. You're a lot more safe staying in Scotland than going out to the land of milk and honey, which is just dripping in the blood of innocents on all sides at the moment. Yeah. So, you know, I think that we have to be aware, but you're right, not all Jews are Zionists and not all Zionists are Jews. In fact, 5 million Christian Zionists, Trump supporters, are urging Israel on at the moment. And these are Christian fanatics who believe that the fall of Jerusalem will bring about an Armageddon, and then that will enable them to go to heaven. I'm sure I haven't sold that right, but that's why these barking mad Christian Zionists in America are keen to see the blood flow in the Middle East.
It's just a fact, Yvonne, wherever there's blood and wars and strife, it's a terrible thing to say, but America is never far behind. They're there somewhere. And can I just take it, we've got a video of Gaza before this began and Gaza today. Can you stick up that video for me, please?
وعين تنزف ماء في فضاء بين فضاء لا مكان له في الوجود.
I mean, it's horrific when you look at it, Yvonne. And that's civilians, and we go back to it and we say this. Now, as I say, I'm not going to repeat about how I feel and view wars and death, but the Palestinians don't have air defence. They don't have heavy weapons. They don't have any kind of missile that can take out a plane, let alone blow up a hospital like that. It is just murder what's happening to those people. And collective punishment is a war crime. It is against international law. Now, the Americans are talking in Russia and everywhere else about, oh, we've got to see international rule-based law, etc. Except, you should say, for viewers in Palestine. I mean, it's shocking.
To all Prism viewers today, I would say, look at that. This is the price that Palestinian people are prepared to pay for freedom. And all we have to do is put a cross on a piece of paper. You know, we must get independence for our own sakes. You've seen what's happened to Craig Murray. We don't want to live in some dystopian nightmare in Scotland. You know, Scotland could be a great force for peace. And for those who say, oh, we're too small, look at Qatar. Qatar has become a major broker of peace in the Middle East, and yet it hasn't even got 1 million citizens. It's a tiny little state punching well above its weight. We in Scotland could be that, because we don't have any enemies.
No, if you go back a few years before that, Yvonne, Norway got some concessions in the time of Yasser Arafat, the Oslo Accord.
Yeah.
Small Norway. So it is possible for us to be a broker, because there's none. And I mean, who can be the honest brokers? Well, because of van der Leyen, it can't be the EU. It certainly cannot be the United States of America or the United Kingdom. So we are looking now towards China or Qatar or I don't know, Russia. It cannot be any of the Western countries who have backed this to the hills.
Do we want to be part of the EU? That's, what I'm also asking. EFTA, fine, absolutely no problem. But as Europe is drifting towards being a right-wing, all the states are turning into right-wing and fascist states. I think that, again, EFTA, which is what Alex Salmond has been promoting, is the answer for us to go towards. And we should look at what is happening to the Palestinian people. They've been occupied for 75 years, and there is no improvement in their conditions. They've been promised all sorts. The two-state solution is dead.
Yeah.
If you have a look at the occupied West Bank, it is a series of little islands with Israeli checkpoints in between. And it is occupied by more than 500,000 Israeli settlers who were living in illegal settlements. And all of those settlements, or the majority, were built after the treaty that Yasser Arafat had signed.
Mm-hmm.
The Israelis are not interested in brokering peace. Of that, I am quite certain. And seeing the activities today, the deliberate targeting of hospitals, the lies, the media distortion, this is a nation which doesn't want peace, nor is it interested in listening to sane voices outside of Israel calling for peace.
No, Craig, I'm sorry he had to go away, but he said last week, I think it was, that if you saw the amount of demonstrations that you alluded to in London, Manchester, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, all over the UK, in fact, and all over Europe, pro-Palestinian, not pro-Israeli gatherings, that, whereby Israel has managed to buy our media and buy our politicians in the West. They haven't bought the people. And you're talking about the EU. If you actually look at the two recent elections, one in Slovakia and one in Poland, two extreme governments have been removed. So there is some hope. But yeah, I'm totally opposed to the EU now. I was never a Brexiteer, but for different reasons. Because the great thing about the EU for years was we used to promote it. Was what it had done was prevented wars in the European mainland, and now it's become a cheerleader for war. I don't want to be in any organisation, Yvonne, that cheerleads wars and supplies arms and ammunition and money to warring. I want peace. I want, I understand the world will never be completely peaceful, but we can do better than we're doing, surely.
Yes, I'm quite sure that that we can, and the need for a Scotland united is definitely there in the next general election. Mm. I just hope that people remember the words of Keir Starmer, the UK Labour leader, his actions, his unconditional support for a rogue state which is out of control. I hope that all Labour supporters in Scotland remember his words, because I can't think of a single Scottish politician who would stand shoulder to shoulder with Starmer, and voters have to remember this and this moment and not go anywhere near their voting card with a cross for Labour. The SNP has got to get its act together as well. And while my heart goes out to Hamza Yusuf for the predicament that is impacting his family today, I would say, for God's sake, man, get a backbone and start looking at the policies. I mean, some of the resolutions that came out of the conference from SNP for Palestine, it was really thin gruel. It was just watered down.
We'll certainly be going into that in great depth in the weekend show. I would say, with what they did come up with, Scotland United's over now. They killed it at the conferences last weekend. That's gone. There has to be a new tactic, and I'm sure that will happen. We're coming towards the end now, Yvonne. The other one is the problem is that the propaganda, and we have a corrupt media. There's no other way to describe the media, whether it be Palestine, whether it be Yemen, which you have ever hear hardly anything about the slaughter that's going on there for years, or Ukraine or Palestine. But James Landell, one of the top BBC correspondents, on talking about trying to deflect from the attack in the hospital that killed somewhere north of 500, some people say as many as 1,000 innocent civilians, was that their biggest concern for Israel was that this could bring in Iran and they have weapons that could actually hurt Israel. That was the BBC's biggest concern, not the 1,000 innocents that had been slaughtered in hospital, which should be a sanctuary of safety and under all international law of war or peace is meant to be. And as long as that kind of corruption stays in our media and our newspapers, etc., there is no chance of peace, Yvonne, is there?
Hassan Zumlot, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK, went and gave an interview in a BBC studio on the day he lost 6 members of his family in Gaza. And the first question he was asked is, will you condemn Hamas? And it's you know, there is no thought at all for the Palestinians. I was listening to, I've got to stop listening to Radio 4, but I was listening to the PM program, very prestigious, key program of Radio 4. And they were talking about, you know, let's talk about who the peacemakers are, who can influence a peace deal for Israel. And they talked about the King of Jordan, the King of Saudi. They talked about the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, and never once mentioned the Palestinians. And of course, we are where we are today because the Palestinians have been completely ignored in the peace process. And it's, how can anyone determine your future if you're not at the table and having a say? Yeah. And the BBC thinks by banning the word terrorist that it's been impartial. Well, that isn't necessarily good journalism. How the hell can you be impartial over the bombing of a hospital where there are just body parts strewn across the land?
Yeah.
And you know, you cannot be on the side of the oppressor.
No, you can't. And if you take no side, you're on the side of the oppressors as well. if you're state
And
island.
we're both peaceniks, you and I, Roddy. You know, we don't want war. We don't want, you know, if there is an army in a free Scotland, I would hope it's got a defensive role.
Absolutely.
And a humanitarian role.
Yeah.
We don't want soldiers going off with the flag of Scotland on their uniform, firing guns, saying that they're bringing peace. I
want to be like our cousins in Ireland and be neutral, although they're getting pressure as well. The warmongers want everyone on board with their world wars. Let's hope it doesn't happen. We'll come to the end, my friend. We'll have to close down. I'm sure we'll come back to this topic soon. I just want to say the one thing, when the tanks of Russia rolled into Ukraine on February 22, within days, the Olympic, what do you call it, the Olympic governing body, UEFA, FIFA, banned and blocked all Russians from any sport anywhere in the world. Where's the talk from the same people to ban Israel? Will they start obeying international law? They're an international pariah state. They should not be allowed on sporting fields because there is not anything sporting about what they do. But of course, it won't happen. And if you even suggest it, as I have done, by tomorrow again, I'll be a Holocaust denying, anti-Semitic Jew hater. Nothing could be further from the truth. I'm a hater of war, I'm a hater of hypocrisy, and that's what we've got throughout the world at the moment, and it breaks my heart. Anyway, after my wee rant, I'm finished for the night. Yvonne, my darling friend, thank you so much. And to your viewers...
There are marches for Palestine in Scotland this Saturday, 2 o'clock in Glasgow. I think Aberdeen and Dundee are also taking part. All the details will be on the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign website. But, you know, please turn out 2 o'clock on Saturday. And please, you'll see me because I'll be waving this, which was incidentally given to me, presented to me by some journalist friends in Gaza. And, you know, they're incredibly courageous people who are in the firing line now. Yeah. So see you all 2 p.m. on Saturday.
Yeah, I wish I could be there. If I could, physically, I would be there. But I won't be in darling old Scotland until the following week. And I hope I don't encounter anything like poor old Craig did. I don't think so. I'm on your small fish. Anyway, folks, we'll see you the weekend. We're sorry there's a wee bit delay for this going out. It's a wee bit late going out. But I had a death in the family and other things. And we're sorry about that, but we'll see you the weekend. And until we do, please, you and yours, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.